Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are, and welcome to the very first Fleet Apac Expert Meeting. Topic today is fleet funding in Asia Pacific. Before we start the expert meeting, we would like to thank founding partners, ELD Automotive Leaseplan and Oryx, for supporting us, setting up the expert meeting. I would like to hand over to Caroline Tenot, our CEO and Fleet Apac Expert, for a few introductory words. Caroline, we cannot hear you.
There seems an issue with the audio, Caroline. You're on mute.
Hello?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah,
okay.
We can hear you.
Oh, there we go. So thank you, Yves. Thank you, Stephen, for the technical support already. Ladies and gentlemen, it's really my pleasure to welcome you to the first Fleet Apac Expert Meeting. We are very proud to launch this new initiative together with you. Many of you will, of course, know Fleet Europe, Fleet LATAM, and Global Fleet. And the region Asia Pacific now becomes a priority for our development. And we think that many of the people joining us today have the same vision. In May this year, we already met with many of you during the Global Fleet Conference in Cascais, where we had the pleasure to focus already on the regions. And just 2 weeks ago, we had our first meeting with the advisory board. And I would also like to thank the members for their advice and the expertise they already shared. As Yves mentioned, I think it's important to express our gratitude towards our partners today, ALD, Leaseplan, and Oryx. Without you, this would not be possible, of course. And having said that, I wish you a very insightful expert meeting. Yves, Stephen, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Vinny, if we can go to the agenda, please. For today's agenda, we will start with a few educational sessions. The first one will be introduced by Stephen and is called Strategic State of Play in the APAC region. We will then go to the local lease market and provide you some baselining in terms of the Asia Pacific fleet ecosystem. I will be doing that presentation to you. Then we have a panel discussions where we have invited Monica Adamus, International Fleet Manager, EMEA region at Elanco Animal Health. We have Mukul Patwardhan, who is Category Manager, Indirect Procurement at Eaton. And then we have Aravind Faluvan, Category Manager Fleet, APMA at Novartis. The questions that we will ask the panel will be about their fleet profile, policy, operations, and procurement. The next presentation will be done by Thierry Faure, ALD CCO Asia Region and Deputy CEO ALD MHC Mobility Thailand, ALD Leaseplan. And Thierry will talk to us about funding options, supplier setup options, innovative leasing, and mobility solutions. The last presentation of the day will be done by Cameron Gurr out of Perth in Australia. Cameron is APAC Bid Manager at Oryx. And Cameron will be talking about the market maturity, leasing characteristics, and what to look for, practical tips for fleet managers. Next slide, please. Here we have the speakers of today in order of appearance: Aravind Faluvan, Monica Adamus, Mukul Patwardhan, Thierry Faure, and Cameron Kerr. Before we start with the presentations, we would like to remind you the concept of the expert meetings. We call it your gateway to APAC content and networking. So expert meetings will be consistently virtual 90-minute conferences. Expertise will be delivered by either fleet managers, supply chain representative, or APAC experts, and ideally all three of them. The content is supported by the Fleet Apac Advisory Board, who is in charge of selecting topics for the expert meetings and providing speakers to deliver you insights and knowledge about the region. Now, I would like to hand over, the next slide, please. I would like to hand over to Stephen, who will be taking care of the first session, Perception and Competition Strategic State of Play in the APAC region. Stephen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Yves. Thank you also to all the participants and our sponsors. It's really great to meet with you in this first Fleet Apac Expert Meeting. Like Yves has mentioned, I will go for several minutes through the state of play in terms of vehicle leasing across APAC based on what we have seen with our platform Global Fleet and more recently with Fleet Apac and with let's say the major players in the region. First, I would like to highlight that the perception about vehicle leasing across APAC is slightly different than we find in other regions. For sure in Europe, where leasing is a mature product, also in LATAM we see more and more growth and maturity, and also in North America. In APAC, there are a few perceptions about vehicle leasing that are not really in favor or hasn't been in favor for the development of the leasing product. We have outlined a few of those elements on the screen. So what we are hearing is that leasing is quite expensive. It's a product that it's probably more developed for international and foreign companies. The product is not always suitable for all the employees within a company, and so will be more directed towards senior employees. According to the leasing product, people are saying that across APAC there is a diversity and a lack of tax incentives related to vehicle leasing. There is also an issue with the offering. So people are saying there are not enough leasing companies. And as we know, in APAC, we have both company cars, but for sure also tool for trade vehicles. People are estimating that leasing is perhaps not the most suitable solution for tool of trade cars. This means that at the moment, leasing is still not as mature as a product as we see in other regions. And with that has also grown the popularity of alternative solutions that have been adopted over time more locally. And you see on the right side of the slide that there is a variety of other products that are popular in various countries across APAC, based on business preferences, based on legacy. For example, the lease loan concept is very popular in China, where the salary sacrifice model, for example, with novated lease, well, we can find that in Australia and New Zealand. Yes, so there are other products that make it or have made it harder for vehicle leasing to develop. Now, there is somehow a positive outlook, of course, for outsourcing and also vehicle leasing. And Benedict, we can go to the next slide. What we are seeing is that based on figures that we with the editorial team could gather, that up to 2019, operational leasing volumes across APAC have hit 2 million units, predominantly in the more mature markets like Japan, South Korea, and Australia. But also in the other countries, we see slowly but surely a growth in vehicle finance outsourcing. And we expect that for this year, by the end of this year, that the regional volumes will easily exceed 3 million units. This also because the Southeast Asia region has joined the vehicle leasing bandwagon. And if we then look a little bit more in the future, and although that also in APAC there are some economic challenges, we expect the hockey stick growth, where until today there was, let's say, a slow growth, but we expect in the upcoming years from 2024 2025 that there will be a more exponential growth of vehicle leasing across the different regions in APAC. So there is a positive outlook for vehicle leasing, which is of course also good news for the suppliers and for the fleet managers in the room. If we look then at the next slide, then of course we need to be a little bit careful because APAC is probably the most complex and also most the biggest region. So Benedict, if you can go to the next slide. And this means that probably also across APAC, the product of vehicle leasing will not develop at the same pace. What we have done and what we will do also in the future to make it as comprehensive as possible with the content that we are going to bring is that we have decided to divide the APAC region in 5 sub-regions. And you see them here with different colors. So in blue, we have East Asia with the enormous market of China, but also the very mature markets of South Korea and Japan. We have Southeast Asia in orange with interesting markets like the Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, and Singapore. We have Australia, New Zealand, in grey. Southeast Asia in red, with a few more exotic countries and as well as India. And then we have Central Asia also in light gray. And to make it in the near future as easy to understand for you, we will also develop with the advisory board and with our editorial team content related to specific sub-regions across APAC because they are evolving at different pace also in terms of vehicle fleet management and leasing. On the next slide, please, if we then look a little bit at what is the market about, what is the ecosystem about, and who are the main categories of the players, we see that there are different categories of players. Um, on the left, we have listed the categories. So we have two expert giants in terms of fleet management and leasing that are based in the region. So Oryx and Sumitomo, both based in Japan. They represent close to 3 million leased vehicles already. Of course, both in the new car leasing world, but also in the release of vehicles. And what is interesting is also that both companies are more and more also focusing on innovation when it comes to sustainability, with, for example, EV charging as one of the latest additions to their portfolio. Next to two next to these two giants, we have, of course, the global slash international alliances. The first one is Arval in partnership with Element and Sumitomo. So they signed in the beginning of this year a new partnership which would strengthen also their presence and their services, their portfolio across the regions. And then there is, of course, the merger ALD lease plan, which has become an enormous giant on a global level. And they have joined forces with different entities of the Mitsubishi Group. So also they are expanding their presence across the region, which for the bigger and multinational companies makes it interesting to work with. Not to forget are the OEMs, so the captive leasing companies of the car manufacturers. In many countries across APAC, those car manufacturers have established finance divisions that play an important role. Major players are also linked, of course, to the domestic car brands like Toyota and Nissan, but also other players are looking how to develop their captive business across the region. And then finally, there are many local leasing companies. Sometimes it's not always sure or transparent what kind of product they really offer. So it can be more short-term renting to a long-term leasing or just a loan. But there are many players across the region that are well established and that have also local expertise in a certain country. Okay, on the next slide, we see the evolution of the key players. So also here on the map, you see already according to the subregions that we just presented, who are the main players in the region. Of course, we see, for example, that companies like Sumitomo and Oryx, they are almost in every region present, while others don't have yet that footprint. But it's good to see that more and more local and international players are looking how to develop their service offering for the customers in the complete region called APAC. Then in terms of the product maturity, so also here there are some key differences, and that we see on the next slide. If we look a little bit at the product maturity, then it goes really from the basics, let's say, to the most developed product that we know, and that is the Western product with the matrix, everything that can be done also unbundled and an open book. You see that on the arrow on the right. If we start on the left, then for example, in countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh, there is only a pure finance product. So there are not much services or no services included. If we then go further on the arrow, then we come to Cambodia and Myanmar, where you can have an all-in with a chauffeur, but in the contracts, often there is no specification in terms of mileage and duration. And you see then on the arrow that there are different stages of maturity, which is logic. Also in the other regions, we went through a development from less mature products to more mature, well-developed leasing products. In Japan, for example, and in Korea, we have already a mature product with mileage and duration, yes, but there is almost no flexibility, and also unbundling is not the best practice in these countries. But you see here, and it's just to illustrate that you can't have a one solution for the complete region. It's still a region with many variables, and so you probably also need to adapt in terms of the product that is available and that you can implement for your local fleets in the different countries where you have activities in APAC. Then my final slide is about why leasing will become more and more popular and will know growth across the region. Well, the first element is linked to the economy. Although that many countries in APAC have still a better economic outlook than countries, for example, in Europe or in Latin America. The GDP predictions were adjusted downwards, yes, and this will probably come also with more with a feeling of more risk averse and willing to spend for risk leverage, which means that leasing could benefit from this risk aversity of the customers. Then, of course, there is the globalization. We have seen throughout the years that more and more companies are centralizing their decision making, also with multinational companies expanding their activities across APAC. We see that they would like to have, if possible, the same product, the same services that they already know from other regions. And so also there, this is a stimulus, of course, for vehicle leasing outsourcing, which is a product that is already better known in other regions across the world. And then the third element is linked to the supply chain. So we believe that by the expansion and the efforts of some international and global players in the region, also the local ones will be stimulated to also develop their services. And we see already that some local players are now also offering more regional wide services. And then, as mentioned just before, throughout time, the product itself will gain maturity. So, in fact, when it comes to vehicle leasing, although that today there are still many differences, we expect in the upcoming years that the leasing product will, one, become more popular, and two, will also gain in popularity in terms of the services that are included into the product. This is in brief an overview of the state of play. I hand over now to Eve again so that you can detail a little bit more what is happening in the different countries. You're on mute, Eve. Yes.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for the technical support again and for your presentation. In the next session, we will be talking about the leasing ecosystem. We will be providing you a baseline knowledge. So it needs to be noted that the topics that we will discuss here are introductory, and we will be omitting some details for the clarity, for the sake of going through all the different regions. As a reminder, there are 5 items to remember, some of which have been touched by Stephen. Leases on the rise, GDP growth adjustment across the region. Then we are looking at energy transition versus energy dependence. As you know, the energy transition in Europe is very present, mainly because of sustainability reasons. This is also the case in APAC, but it's on top of that also a factor of energy dependence that comes to play, which means that the Asian countries want to be less dependent on the import of energy, want to become more autonomous when it comes to delivering energy, which means that most countries, it means that they will start producing energy locally, and electrification is very often an element of that transition. High maturity for form factor and mobility, but we will come back to that point at the last slide of the presentation. And an ecosystem alignment is what Stephen just talked about. It is the growth of the popularity of the leasing product and the alignment of the product scope. Next slide, please, Benedict. So over the next slides, we will be going through the different sub-regions and talk very briefly about the typical solutions, the alignment or the similarities with Western models, the possibility of OEM and lease tendering. Let's start with Northeast Asia. The biggest country in Northeast Asia is obviously China. The typical solution in China is not leasing, but is its expense notes. People use public transport, they use their own cards, or they use cars, or they use mobility solutions such as Didi. Is China comparable to a Western model? Well, there is not much operational leasing in China, and the estimate is 0.05% of the market penetration is operational lease. But there's also the fact that in China, there's a limited access to license plates in tier 1 cities. So they are the bigger cities in the country. And limited access to license plate means that it is not just the case that you want the car, you buy a car and you get the license plate. No, you have to apply for license plates either through lotteries or by paying money. EVs are predominant in the Chinese tier 1 cities because of regulations. OEM tendering is not possible. Lease tendering is possible, but it is very challenging. Then South Korea, second country, typical solution is an operational lease model. It's at 47 months. Is it a Western model? The lease providers deliver very good services. We're mainly talking about Kia and Hyundai. Hyundai's leasing providers, Hyundai Capital. Obviously, there are very few Japanese brands present in South Korea, and electric vehicles, hybrids are available. OEM tendering is not necessary because the leasing companies will provide you the best prices for the vehicles. Obviously, if you have very large volumes, then it's worth looking at OEM tendering. Lease tendering is possible, but it is a complex process. Japan, the typical solution in Japan is a 36-month lease. There is a specific reason for the 36-month lease, and that means that after the 36th month, a vehicle needs to pass technical control, which is a different type of technical control as we know in Europe. It is an expensive process. Is it a Western model? They have excellent local leasing providers, but the product availability is very often limited to 3 years, 120,000 kilometers. OEM tendering is possible, but it requires big volumes to be efficient. Lease tendering is also possible, but it's also a very slow process, typical for Japanese change management. Taiwan, the typical lease solution is 48 months. They have good providers, the local players and the giants are present in Taiwan. OEM tendering requires big volumes, but lease tendering is absolutely possible. Next slide, please. South Asia, let's start with India. The typical solution for international corporate clients is to provide operational leasing vehicles. Local clients, however, go for allowance models or salary sacrifice models. Is it a Western model? There are very good leasing providers in India, and there are very good local OEMs, Maruti Suzuki, Mahindra, Tata, examples of them, and a good availability of locally assembled and produced international brands. This is important because it allows corporate customers to avoid paying the import taxes of vehicles into India. So you would always have to go for a locally produced or a locally assembled vehicle. OEM and lease tendering is totally possible in India. Bangladesh, smaller countries, Bangladesh, typical solution is outright purchase. Is it a Western model? Not really. The people in Bangladesh are very professional, but there are very good corporate suppliers, very few corporate suppliers. OEM tendering is possible, but the best results are delivered with local importers or even on dealership level. Lease tendering is not possible. Pakistan, typical solutions is outright purchase or finance. It's not really a Western model because of the limited availability of cars. Now, in Pakistan, you just don't go to a garage and you buy cars. The availability of new vehicles in Pakistan is limited, and very often the vehicles that are offered to Pakistani companies have been imported from Japan. So you basically look at a second-hand vehicle, even if the mileage is low. OEM tendering, therefore, is not really possible. It's again limited by vehicle availability, and lease tendering is not possible either. You typically go for a finance solution or an outright purchase solution. Next slide, please, Benedict. Australia and New Zealand, and we will have Cameron at the end of the session to talk a little bit more about that, but very briefly, Australia and New Zealand are very mature countries from a lease perspective. Novated lease, which is a salary sacrifice model, is also extremely popular in Australia. OEM tendering is possible, lease tendering is possible. And for both countries, we do see an increased focus on sustainable solution. Next slide, please, Benedict. Then Southeast Asia. Let's start with Indonesia. Typical solution is a 48-month lease. It is more or less a Western model, but there are a few low-quality vendors across the supply chain, and the country has a very specific geography with the many islands. So when you look for a supplier, you need to know exactly where your company needs cars and also include your geographical presence into your tender. OEM tendering is limited to a few Japanese brands. Lease tendering is possible. Philippines, typical solution is either fleet management, which means that you would buy the cars yourself, but you would have them managed as if they were leasing vehicles. But there's also an operational leasing system, which is a little bit different from what we know in the West. Filipino solutions are always a combination of two contracts. So you might have a 36-month contract followed by a 24-month contract, or 24 followed by 24. This is because of regulatory restrictions. And the Filipino leasing companies need to split the leasing contracts above 36 months in two parts. The lease rates for these two parts are not the same. You will go for a higher lease rate in your first piece and a lower lease rate in your second piece, typically. Is it a Western model? No, mainly due to the limited supply chain, but also, again, the difficulties linked to the country's geography. Again, Philippines is a country with a lot of islands, so here as well, you need to look at where your company cars are driving, and include that in your tender. OEM tendering is difficult, but lease tendering is possible. Thailand is a more mature country with at least 48 months. Western model, yes. OEM tendering is possible. Lease tendering is also possible. Vietnam, the typical solution is outright purchase or a lease with a driver, which is a standard solution in Vietnam. It's not a Western model. The supply chain is not very mature. OEM tendering is possible on a local importer level or perhaps on a dealership level, but it's going to be difficult. Lease tendering is also very limited because of the less mature supply chain. Then finally, Malaysia, the typical solution is outright purchase, although there is operational leasing available. It's not really a Western model, and that is mainly because of the high administrative workload linked to providing company cars in Malaysia, although leasing companies can help you with those services. OEM tendering is possible, lease tendering is possible, but please note that it is very limited. Next slide, please. And to finish this session, I would like to spend a few words on mobility in Asia-Pac. We have a few logos of especially Southeast Asian mobility providers. Now, mobility solutions, for one, they are available across the region. They are highly mature, and the reason for that is obviously that the penetration, the vehicle ownership penetration is very low in many countries in APAC. Therefore, people will have motorcycles, but they will use mobility solutions when they need a car. It is embedded and adopted, and this is an important factor. It is a typical go-to solution for consumers and corporates alike. They offer more than just one solution. Typically, you would be able to get a taxi type of service, ride-hailing, but you could also share a vehicle. You could probably also rent a motorcycle or sit at the back of a motorcycle. You could have your shopping done by these providers. You could order food, and in case of Grab, which is the most developed, most mature provider, they even offer payment services, bank services, insurance services, and so on. So we see a mobility ecosystem that is, to some extent, more mature than is the case in Western countries. Business accounts are available, which means that they can provide for centralized invoicing, one invoice per month. They are affordable, but they are mostly ignored in local policies. This closes the second session of this expert meeting. And now I would like to invite the fleet managers, Monica, Aravind, and Mukul, to the stage. And I would also like to invite Stephen to the stage. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have invited 3 fleet managers with car fleets in APAC, and we will ask a few questions to the fleet managers that have kindly accepted our invitation. The questions that we will be asking them is a short description of their fleet in APAC, how their fleet operations are being organized, what the main strategic targets are for the APAC fleet, what kind of policy they have implemented, and what the procurement methodology is for the APAC region. Monica, Aravind, Mukul, let me first thank you for taking the time and joining us today in this expert meeting. You're very welcome. I would like to start, Monica, with you. You're representing Elanco Animal Health. Could you tell us a little bit more about the fleet profile in Asia of Elanco's fleet, please?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Yves, for the invitation for this meeting. My name is Monika Damus. I represent Elanco Animal Health, which is a global company. I am placed in Europe, in Poland. My main scope of responsibilities is EMEA region. However, I do support APAC and Latin America as well. So I am glad to be here today to share what I can share about APAC, but to hear from other colleagues as well. So in terms of Elanco fleet, as I mentioned, this is a global company with APAC within the scope. And we are operating in 13 APAC countries, and the number of vehicles that we have got in APAC is 400. And this is about 20% of the total global Elanco fleet. The main acquisition method that we have got today is leasing. However, we still do have some countries where we are owning fleet still. For today, this is Bangladesh and India, but in the future, the idea is to switch for the leasing. But the second very popular approach that we have got in some APAC countries is car allowance. This is mainly China, Malaysia, and India, where we do not have any company cars in place, maybe with few exceptions with some individual vehicles which are used by high-level expat employees, where they have company cars. But in majority of cases, this is either leasing or car allowance. When it comes to car allowance, this is quite popular, as I said, China, Malaysia, and India, where employees do not have actually any choice, any alternative. So everybody who is eligible to have, who is eligible for a company car, they are having car allowance only without any option. In general, in terms of car allowance, we do follow the market, which means that depending on what market is saying, Elanco is implementing. So in some cases, we have got car allowance as the alternative. So employees may choose between company car or cash allowance. And it may be applicable for business need and benefit employees, or for benefit employees only. So again, this is really market-driven decision. In some countries, cash allowance is the only option, and we still have got some countries where car allowance is not applicable at all. So this is about our way of how we possess fleet. Coming back to the type of fleet, this is again a decision. The majority of Elanco fleet are passenger cars and CUVs, but in some regions we do have pickups, but pickups are kind of models that we are really trying to minimize in terms of the price of these cars, in terms of fuel consumption of these cars, and finally in terms of CO2 emission. So if somebody really needs this kind of car to provide the job because of geographical coverage, because of territory that he or she drives, this is internal decision if such employee can use this kind of model. So it really depends on the job's profile at the end. We have got motorbikes as well, and the motorbikes are used mainly in Bangladesh and Vietnam, where due to the traffic conditions, it's not convenient for field staff to use company cars for visiting clients, and it is much easier to use motorbikes. So this is how our fleet is organized here in Elanco.
Monica, what is the type of employee that would receive a company car in Asia? Are we talking about the salespeople or only the senior management?
In majority of cases, of course, this is, the biggest population is the field, is the sales team. So group who is representing Elanco in front of our customers. Of course, we have got management level as well. And here for management level, in majority of cases, employees who are hired as managers or high-level managers, they are eligible to have a company car as well. And again, it depends on the market if this is a car or if this is a cash, or the choice. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Monica. Aravind, I would like to hand over to you with the same question. Could you give us a brief description of your fleet in APAC?
Thanks, Yus. Thanks for this thing. So myself, Arvind, I'm representing Novartis. For the APMA region, I handle Asia Pacific and Middle East and Turkey over here. So in Novartis, so probably few of you already know this is a pharmaceutical company, basically. So our majority of fleet is located within the tool of trade, where it's mainly meant for field force associates. And we do have 10% of associates, which has been given as perks as a company car. So the overall fleet inventory for APAC region alone, excluding Meta, is approximately around 2,500 vehicles we have currently. And out of that, 80% is almost a full operating lease, where we have associated with all these leasing partners whom you have mentioned earlier. It's either with Oryx, Sumitomo, or ALD, probably in this market. And then the majority of the markets are major countries what we have, where we have fleets are specifically it's Japan, which is the topmost. We have around 1,400 vehicles. And then Philippines, Taiwan, probably. And then we have in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Australia, and New Zealand. So we do have a cash allowance models in the company, where in countries like Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam, we do provide cash allowance models for the field force associates. So these are the overview of overall geography is for Novartis.
Thank you so much, Aravind. So 80% tool of trade. So these are usually salespeople, I would suppose.
Yeah, we refer tool of trade for only for the salesperson. When it is given for a field force associates, it's referred to as a tool of trade.
Okay. Benefit vehicles, we're talking senior management expats?
It depends in country wise. This is more of country specific policy. So benefits as cars has been given for the senior managers as well as the top management associates as well, both.
Understood. Thank you so much. Mukul, welcome. We would like to ask you the same question. Can you describe us in a few words the profile of your fleet in Asia Pac?
Yeah, thanks, Thanks, Stephen, and apologize. My camera is not working from last few days, so I cannot open the camera. And thanks for inviting me to the inaugural session. For my fleet, I would say from what the other panelists said, I think our fleet is much closer to what Monica mentioned in terms of model. For the size, I would say the fleet size is about 800 to 1,000. But one challenge is because our company is quite a big organization and bifurcated operations at a local entity level also, that we may not have the full visibility of the fleet, especially because of the APAC market, right? So about 800 to 1,000 fleet, but it can be 20% more also. I would say the model is split between 60-40 outright purchase and leasing, depending on the market. Our major market would be obviously China, Japan, India, and then the ANZ region. Fleet is mainly for sales executive and executive entitlement. And again, depending on the market, it depends on who the leasing providers are or we will work with. Because in some countries, like the country where I come from, for executive entitlement, it also entails chauffeur driven cars also, right? And then it becomes a local player who can provide those kind of a services. But more and more, as Stephen mentioned in his introduction, more and more now we are moving towards the Western model, or at least we are trying to move to Western model wherever we can, with 36 months, 48 months lease model. But the focus is on local OEMs, because China and India do have significant local OEMs, so that is the focus. But wherever we can, and Korea also, right? So these are the Asian OEMs, let's call it that way. Toyota, Nissan, Kia, Hyundai, Mahindra, Tata, those kind of players, depending on the market again.
Mhm. Okay. There is a question that popped in from one of the attendees, and probably it could be that you know him. It's from Wilson Bilivicius of AbbVie. He is interested, of course, in the fact that you are all also allowing cash allowance in some of the countries for some of the people. In the case you allow cash allowance, how do you track fleet metrics like maintenance, accidents, etc.? Perhaps Aravind to start?
Yeah, this is something an interesting story for all the HSE guys. The drive care, which is a prime responsibility, which we are focusing now, how we want to implement, because we do have in Japan all the cars fitted with telematics device, but unfortunately, when you provide a cash allowance, you don't have allow a permission to install a telematics on their personal car. So this is a quite challenging. So we are trying to adapt a situation where we won't emphasize employee to report all the incidents. So this is being driven by the HSE community, but still I can say we are not in a mature way at this point of time, because this is one of the reason why we were not in implementing the choice model of cars, especially in the bigger markets.
Mhm. Okay. Monica, do you have perhaps something to add in terms of how you work at Elanco in terms of tracking fleet metrics for those that get a cash allowance?
I would say it's quite similar to what my colleague just said. I mean, there is a local process in place, how people should approach in terms of reporting accidents. In terms of servicing vehicles, it may depend country versus country. For example, China, the cash allowance in China is split between two parts. Like there is one part which is dedicated purely for fuel, let's say, based on the average number of kilometers that employees drive, and the second part is dedicated for service. So if we pay cash allowance on a monthly basis, it doesn't matter if this is one amount or two. This is always on the employee side, and this is employee responsibility to cover all what is needed. And Elanco does not pay an additional, doesn't have an additional spend on top, which is covered in the car allowance. But this is quite challenging, especially in terms of sustainability piece and reporting all the scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, like business need, commuting, and private use. And this is something that we will be discussing for sure internally, how we can approach this in terms of global sustainability reporting, especially for private vehicles.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yves, back to you.
Yeah, maybe go a little bit deeper into the main targets for the APAC fleet. Mukul, if we can start with you. What is the highest strategic objective on the corporate agenda globally, and probably then also for the APAC region? Are we talking safety? Are we talking sustainability? Are we talking saving money?
Globally, I would say savings, but again, then it becomes a very region specific. My main region is EMEA,
Yes.
so sustainability and EV transition is very high on agenda. But in APAC, sustainability, to be very honest, is still on a wish list because of the market.
Okay.
But savings and safety is very high on agenda because we as a company do focus and give importance on the safety aspect. So we do have that would be the top two agenda. And on the question which was asked earlier regarding car allowances and how do we manage accidents and everything, yeah, it's a big challenge. But that's why the model is also cash allowance, so that technically that car is not on our fleet, so the impacts on CO2 is not on our side. But as a, I won't say as a policy, but as a guideline, we do ask drivers to report any accident or maintenance issues to us also, especially accident piece.
Even if they have an accident with their private car?
Yes.
Okay, thanks so much, Mukulu. Aravind, we heard from Mukul that safety is the top item on the agenda, but also savings. How would that be for Novartis?
Yeah, as you can see from my background, so sustainability is the prime important factor. So we have started the sustainability journey in Europe and US 2 years back, probably 3 years back. We built a strategy, and since last year we started implementing in APAC as well. This thing we have been successful in some countries already, where we started rolling out the electric vehicles. Like in ANZ, we were successful. In Japan, we are just completing the pilot of things. But I cannot say it's only the priority. Basically, when it comes to sustainability, basically we do have an overall program as a greenfield program where we cover the safety of the drivers. We call it as drive care, as well as we prioritize the spend as well. Basically, how much we spend for this one, we do monitor all those things into the comprehensive thing actually. So but the prime factor is sustainability, where we are focusing to convert all our vehicles into electric vehicles. So this is what the prime factor.
I understand, Aravind, that you are piloting the program first in Australia, New Zealand, and in Japan. How do you see the further rollout of the program into, let's say, the more difficult countries?
So probably we are not piloting in Australia and New Zealand. We have a direct implementation in Australia and New Zealand. Actually, we did implement it. We are in continuing implementing this one. Okay, so the policy is being rolled out to convert everything into electric vehicles. But in Japan, as a nature normally, so as a culture, people wants to go for anything as a pilot, learn from the pilot, and then do the full implementation. So this is what. Of course, we did completed our pilot recently in Japan. We do have a lot of learnings, of course, because every market is different. Like it's not same like Europe. You can provide a home charging solutions and just convert every car into an electric vehicle, because most of the APAC countries you will not be able to provide a home charging solutions. That's the biggest challenge in sustainability goals to meet in APAC. So Japan, it's one of the prime factor when you need to depend everything on public charging stations. We are a little bit working on it. We are working with our peer companies as well within Japan, share our knowledge. We found a lot of insights, a lot of expertise over there, and big learnings from the pilot for last 3 months, with a major stress coming from the public charging stations. Going and charging during your business hours is one of the major concerns from our colleagues, which we are trying to address it currently.
Thanks so much, Aravind. I hope that in future sessions you can share a little bit of those learnings.
Absolutely.
Monica, same question for you. Animal Health, your targets for the Asian Pacific fleet.
I would say 3S, like safety, savings, and sustainability. Safety is always first, so there is no discussion, in terms of savings, in terms of safety. This is something that we have to take care of. One of our points in the global policy is referring to crash tests, where we need to follow minimum 4 stars, and this is quite challenging in some Asia Pacific countries because there are no crash tests at all. So we need to, try to understand each local market, how we can work around. In terms of savings, this is very challenging actually everywhere because cars prices went up, interest rates went up, fuel price went up. So this is something which is really quite challenging. That's why we are trying to we are trying to choose models with lower fuel consumption, so at least we can save some money on fuel plus to be more green. We need to be very careful about PHEV. This is the general observation, because I used to be a fan of PHEV vehicles some time ago, but now I can see this is quite tricky, because we need to be sure that everybody who chooses this kind of car will really use electric engine. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense, even from the economical perspective and from the sustainability perspective. In terms of sustainability, this is what I already mentioned, that this is our Elanco global top priority right now, but Asia Pacific is quite difficult. We are trying to implement at least hybrid vehicles. I think they are more safe versus plug-ins. And we will be, looking for solutions for implementing electric cars like Aravind did. So this is a good moment for us to have some connection even to discuss it.
Yeah, and that's also what this platform is for.
Yeah,
Monica.
exactly.
Stephen, I'm going to hand over to you for the next question.
Well, probably something that can be interesting is also to see how you balance out what has been decided or what is decided globally and then implemented locally. I can imagine that if you need to manage a fleet across APAC in many different countries, that there can also be some resistance from local entities, not only drivers, but also stakeholders. So, how do you balance out in an efficient way what has been decided globally and then make sure that also locally it's working, it is implemented, there is a policy that is followed? Perhaps to start again with Aravind.
Yeah, to mention you, so this is something what we are doing is currently the global sustainability taggers are penetrated into across regions and the countries first of all actually. So every country wants the sustainability targets, and previously we have been arranged as a country specific fleet operational things, and now we are in the process of transitioning to a centrally owned global governed fleet category managers basically. So that is what we say is more of we are trying to go for a simplification on fully outsourced model where we want to manage the fleet at regional levels across the APAC. This is one thing. So this helps you to govern all the things at a country level and help you to penetrate the goals and the ambitions over the country. And when we go into a something called as green fleet program which we run for every country, so we do have a clear set of governance, like there will be members of councils from the country representatives who wants this project actually and run on behalf of it, and only the expertise advice can be given from the regional and global on these topics. So this is how we drive it actually currently. Of course the policies are something governed at local level, or can be named as a country specific policy, but we do have a global standard policy for fleet which will overall govern the safety standards and how the operating lease should be there, how the full operating lease, everything will be governed based on the standards. So there will be a global directions, but however the policy will be country specific.
Do I understand correctly, Aravind, that in the new, let's say, strategy or in the rollout that you are now doing, that you are filtering out the local fleet managers?
So exactly, we don't have a specific fleet managers at the country level. So
Okay.
it's more of a shared resource. But what we are trying to do is we are standardizing and transitioning toward a regional level. So something like it will be centrally managed with a full outsourcing model. So this is what for the next 2 to 3 years, what we are focusing in APAC region exactly.
Mukul, coming to you. Of course, people in India are not wanting the same as people in China or people in Malaysia. So, how do you make sure that everyone stays satisfied? Because even in less mature markets or even there, it's even a bigger fact that a car can be seen as a very important status element. So, how do you make sure that everyone, both internally and also your drivers, that they stay satisfied with the things that have been decided more on a global or regional level?
Thanks, Stephen. No, so I'd say yes, the policies are local or regional. I would say more on a country specific than local, but there are few elements of the policy which are coming from global, which are non-negotiable, especially around safety
Mm-hmm.
elements, sustainability push. So these are the two components which are more or less like non-negotiable. It can vary based on the market demands, who the partners would be and those kind of a thing, but it cannot be that okay, in one market safety is not that important. So that's how the global policy drives. And as I said, sustainability is very mature in EMEA, but
Mm-hmm.
not so in APAC. But again, the push is towards as much as we realistically can. We should go for solutions which are sustainable. So PHEV, mild hybrids, even EV in some cases like China market where we can have it, we should have it. That's the
Mm-hmm.
I won't say in some cases it's a policy, in some cases it's a guidance depending on what the ground reality is.
Okay, that's clear. Eve, perhaps the next
I
question from you.
think we need to hear from Monica from a policy perspective. Monica, global policies, regional ambitions, or local realities?
So we have like global thinking globally, acting locally, which means that we have got global policy in place, which is providing high-level guidelines and requirements, especially in terms of health and safety, procurement piece like approved supplier list, for example, some expectations from some list of expectations from authorized driver, how to manage exceptions, etc. But then we have got local car procedures, and what we recommend is always based on the specific country conditions, which means that we need to verify the market and we need to follow the market practice as well. So this is how we do. So we have got global policy in place, but then every single country has got its own local car procedure.
Thank you. And from a procurement perspective, and this is the last question that we're going to ask the panel members, from a procurement perspective, would you say that you follow international procurement strategies? So basically focus on the international vendors and so on, or would you allow for localization, Monica?
We have got global contracts in place, but in some countries it's not possible to cooperate with these global vendors. That's why wherever it is possible, we do cooperate with the global vendors. If not, we sign local contracts with local players.
Thank you so much. Same question for you, Mukul. Preference for the global ones, but local when necessary?
Yes, I would say driven by global policies, but implemented at a local or regional level policies, driven by market conditions and realities of the particular market or region.
Thank you so much. Finally, Aravind, same question for you. The procurement perspective.
Yeah, procurement
International
perspective.
procurement strategy. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, procurement perspective is something an international one, but however, when coming to leasing partners, basically it's something specific to regional level, because we don't the international partners doesn't have 100% coverage in APAC at this point of time. So that's a major challenge. Probably when we look at 2 to 3 years before, it was not so great compared to what we see today. Actually, now they are penetrating in a better way. So that's how. But we are working on global plus regional focus. This is how we are penetrating, not specific country specific things, at least.
Thank you so much, Monica Adamus, Arvind Faruvan, Mukul Patradhan, for your valuable contribution to this panel conversation. It was a pleasure having you.
Yves, one quick question to Arvind.
Yes.
I wanted to understand, especially from the APAC perspective, how the savings model works for you. Is it a big focus or not that big focus because of the market type, or?
So probably it's either you take APAC or US or Europe. For me, when you ask savings in the fleet, it's more of demand management. It's nothing. We call it as demand management versus price, because you cannot generate price savings in a fleet. So you need to look for demand management. When you look for a demand management, you need to have a change in the policies where the adaptability will be having high resistance from the employees. So because they see it's a benefit reduction. So probably Mukul, this is more of related to a demand management where you need to look into how you spend your fuel, how much you allow the persons to travel, all those stuffs in a fleet category.
But
This is
then
how I see.
don't you do some regular works like extension of contract, adjustment of contracts, comparison between the quotes, those kind of a thing?
No, we do regular contracts, but we do
Okay.
have stick to our OA leasing partners. Basically, we do have some standard calculations at TCO level, okay, with all our leasing partners, where they help to produce which type of vehicles. Even the vehicle selection plays a key role over here when you go for a TCO version. So that's what.
Mukul, what I hear is that there's a clear interest for understanding more about the procurement strategies, and then a little bit of a focus on saving methodologies and saving registrations. We will take that along into the next topics for the expert meetings, and we will involve you also, Mukul, when we establish the question here. So again, thank you so much, Monica Damus, Arvind Faruvan, Mukul Patradhan. You were amazing. Thanks for joining us, for taking the time.
Thank you.
Now, the time is come for our founding partners, ALD LeasePlan and Oryx, to present their sessions. And I would like to invite Thierry Faux for the session expertise, supplier expertise by ALD LeasePlan. Please, Thierry, I think you are going to share your screen. There we go, we can see your screen.
Let me do that.
Jerry, can we do a quick voice test? Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you perfectly. Thank you so much. We see your presentation on the screen, but I don't know if you are sharing it, Thierry, or if Benedict and Orpheus is sharing it. Or Benedict is sharing it.
Okay. All right, good. Good morning to our colleagues in Europe. Good afternoon to the folks here in APAC region. Very happy to be with you in this expert meeting. Thank you, Stephen and Yves, and thank you to the fleet managers who have shared very valuable insights. And I think I will be able to shed some lights on some of the topics which were discussed. Which funding or which sourcing model is the first question in APAC? It's true that there are different maturity markets. So what I would say first, and it echoes what was mentioned by Stephen in his intro, is that leasing is not very popular or not very well known across the region, I would say, apart from Australia, New Zealand, and even India and Japan. There are many misconceptions about leasing. Some people think it's only for highly paid executives. Some people have no idea about the tax. They think there is no tax incentives, but actually they have never made tax comparisons with cash allowance, for example, where usually leasing comes as more beneficial. So it's not clear what leasing can bring, and we start having sustainability challenges as well in the region, which is, I think, one more reason to consider better control on the fleet. There were comments by the fleet managers around safety. We're going to talk about this. So if we go to the next, I'm going to compare 4 models: CapEx purchase, cash allowance, salary sacrifice, which is sometimes novated lease, and the operational lease as it exists to some extent in the countries, but less than 10% of the registrations. CapEx purchase, obviously, if company is cash rich, is company having a very good cost of borrowing money. From a pure financial standpoint, it's an option which typically CFOs are interested in. But if we think about it, I mean, cars are not very productive assets, not probably the best use of your resources. If you decide to own the car, it also means you have to involve in sourcing tires, in buying maintenance, repair services, in managing the fleet in-house, creating a car policy, managing very basic interactions with the drivers on a daily basis. And when you do this, actually what you miss is that you don't have real benchmark on what is the right investment in the cars. Are you going with 2 big cars, 2 small cars? So it has more disadvantages than benefits. Then we have a cash allowance, which indeed is, I would say, very popular because it is super simple. And it gives a lot of freedom to the employee on the choice of the car. Even some employees take the cash, but use the cash partly for something else. Obviously, for the company, there is no supplier management, no asset management, so it's super simple. I have looked at it in a number of countries across the region. It's a bad economic decision. Compared to leasing, the employee pays for the VAT. Usually, the cash allowance is taxable income. So compared to a leasing solution, it's not a good economic calculation. It was mentioned, I think it was by Monica, on the greenhouse gas reporting. Individual company cars, I would say the companies no longer can fulfill their obligations on CO2 emissions reporting. And I think more critically, and I know that some of our global clients are concerned and want to switch away from cash allowance, is the risk of liability. If you have an employee on business, driving his own car, creating an accident, creating a third-party injury or serious accident, well, the company cannot say that it is controlling this car. Was the car well maintained? Was the car in good condition? Don't know. So it's a potential liability risk as well for the global corporations. So obviously there is no safety standards as well. So it's a bit of an issue. Salary sacrifice. I mean, there are some countries, indeed Australia, where it's very popular. Likewise in India, actually. I would say it's a bit better than cash allowance, but it's not optimized in terms of taxation. And, it's car by car. So There is no sourcing, no savings approach because you don't have you cannot leverage the scale of your fleet on both leasing with the leasing companies, discounts with the car manufacturers or the car importers. So it's suboptimal. Leasing has many benefits. I think you all know them because you are familiar with leasing in Europe or elsewhere in the world. But it's worth reminding them. It is lighter on balance sheet than CapEx purchase or outright purchase. You can control the TCO. You can leverage your economy of scales. You have a certainty of a budget. You can make your providers accountable in a simple one-stop shopping. And obviously, in the current sustainability agenda we are all having, it's an opportunity to be much more proactive on CO2 emissions. And CO2 is not country A or country B, it's a global problem. So I would think that the emissions in APAC are as important as the emissions in Europe or in the Americas. And that's a responsibility for global corporates to think that they can better tackle their sustainability targets by going through leasing with providers who will help them. So obviously, if you go leasing, you have to manage suppliers, but this can be minimized through the number of suppliers you decide to have. You also have to manage a fleet, but these things can be outsourced. So I think leasing has many benefits, including in the APAC region. If we go to the next slide, if you have decided to, well, just a reminder, just push the button, thank you. It's just a reminder on this slide, I will not detail it. I think all attendants would have access to the slide. It summarizes the benefits on the right-hand side, and on the left-hand side, it's also about having in the region leasing products which bring flexibility on duration, on mileage, possibilities of contract modification. I read in the slides that under mileage is not credited in Thailand. I can tell you it is credited with us in Thailand. We apply exactly the same product as we do in Europe, bringing flexibility to our clients. And I think this is one of the reasons why also leasing has not developed so much in the region, or at least in Southeast Asia. It's because the product which has been offered by the leasing providers is a very basic and sophisticated product, which is not bringing enough flexibility benefits to the drivers and to the global corporates. If we go to the next slide, when you have decided to go leasing, like in Europe, like anywhere, you have to wonder, okay, should I go sole supply or should I go multi-supply? Multi-supply, whether you do yearly batches, quarterly batches, the idea is to compare quotes and to pick the lowest price on quotes. As a reminder, quote is not TCO. The rental is only 60% about the TCO. There are many more costs, fuel cost, insurance, energy cost when you go EV or plug-in, which have to be managed. So multi-supply is about cheap quotes. Sole supply may make sense. It all depends on the scale of the fleet. And usually you will focus more on outsourcing to one provider and making this provider accountable for delivering your TCO savings and your sustainability agenda. If we push the button, please, the next two. So we have a model for you where you have a cost-benefit calculator just to help you assess, do you think your procurement savings will be higher than the cost of managing the multi-supply? If you are not too sure, you are probably better off going sole supply, especially in countries where your fleet will be 100, 150 units. You would not have the scale to reach much better prices through multi-supply bidding. If you go to the next slide, having shared the context on these funding options and supplier setup choices, just to talk a little bit about us, what we now offer in the region across 8 countries, which you will see soon on the next slide, is the full range of bundled services, including consultancy on model selection. I mean, someone talked about demand management and car policy. Yes, saving starts with selecting the right models based on TCO, and we can help you find out the right models. Fuel services, fuel is the second cost in a TCO, so it has to be controlled, but also offering EVs, also offering online reporting so that you can monitor the inventory of your fleet, your CO2, and your cost. All this is now available in the following markets on the map. If we go to the next slide, you will see that ALD LeasePlan with its Mitsubishi or Mitsubishi Hitachi Capital MHC partners are present across 8 countries in the region with 0.8 million vehicles. So maybe it's not big enough for our partners at Nexus to qualify us as a giant, but I would say it is big enough to provide regional coverage with a consistent product. And yes, we do provide regional agreements. I will not give the names, but there are some companies to whom we have made regional APAC proposal across these 8 countries. And hopefully in the future, we will have a few more countries in the region. If we look at the next slide, this is typical of an FSL product, including a fuel card. Soon we will be adding the charging services for EVs. Not quite ready on this yet, but maybe in 2-3 years from now, we will need to offer this in the region as we do in Europe. Moving to the next slide, because I want just to give enough time to Cameron, I'm rushing. We have 2 products. We have ALD Flex, which is 1 to 24 months. It's midterm rental. Here, you don't choose a car, you choose a category, and you get a vehicle from our stock of cars. So you get it right away. You don't have to wait for the car manufacturer to build this car and to deliver it. And you can return it whenever you want, whether you keep it 3 months, 6 months, or 24 months. So this is Flex. And we also have the traditional product of full service lease. Next slide, please. But what we've done, next, yes, thank you. What we've done is that we have created what we call ALD Mileage Flex, which is very similar to matrix pricing for those of you who know this. So it's about flexibility on the choice of the duration, on the choice of the mileage, and being able to change it during the life of the contract, also being able to extend a contract. So we offer this flexibility because we know that the old times of fixed duration, unlimited mileage are not suited to the needs of our clients also in this region. In short, this is what I wanted to share with you. I'm sure we will have other opportunities to discuss, but as a reminder, challenge the status quo. I see many clients who tell us, yeah, APAC is a bit apart. It's not that different. So challenge your local stakeholders when they are providing cash allowance because it is simpler for them. Evaluate properly leasing versus the other options. You can consider regional solutions as you do in Europe. You can do it in Asia to scale up and to leverage your scale. And yes, we have to think EV and sustainability. In Thailand, in the last 3 months, 12% of the cars registered were battery electric vehicles. Great Wall has announced that they will manufacture 8 EVs in Thailand starting next year. So the sustainability agenda is also possible in APAC. The vehicles are getting ready. The charging infrastructure is coming. So we are here as well to assist on this sustainability agenda. Thank you for your attention. Back to you, Yves.
Merci Thierry out of Bangkok for this fantastic presentation and the insights in the region from a product perspective. I would now like to invite Cameron Gurr to join us. Hello, Cameron. Good afternoon. You're based in Perth, so it's already getting later in the afternoon for you. You're on mute, Cameron. So can you please test the sound works well?
There you go. Yeah. So late in the afternoon, Brian. That's right. I appreciate the opportunity to get a chance to talk to everyone. And again, thanks to everyone who's come on before. I think one of the benefits of going last is I get to make sure I'm not repeating the messages that have come earlier in the call, and also it also validates some of the things we were planning on speaking about. So yeah, happy to have I should be able to keep mine nice and tight. I've only got 4 slides to go through, and we'll sort of push through. I think Benedict is running the show for me, so just want to push on to the first slide. Thank you. So just as a bit of a snapshot of who Oryx are globally and in the region, obviously I work for the Australian and New Zealand part of the business, but one of my responsibilities is to manage any client relationships that we have that span across the Asia Pacific. We're present in 11 countries in the Asia Pacific where we do leasing. But as an organization, as a group of companies, Oryx obviously has representation all over the world. We're a very sort of diverse financial services business. We're also part of the global fleet. Sorry, I say this quite often. With 35,000 staff that we employ, they're not all in fleet, obviously. The Oryx Group is a very diverse sort of financial services and investment entity, and we own a baseball team in Japan as well. So lots of employees across the business, but look after about 1.7 million cars in the Asia Pacific, and we're part of the Global Fleet Alliance, where we have formed a sort of a thought sharing, knowledge sharing, opportunity sharing agreement with Holman in the US and Equestra in South Africa. Next slide, thanks, Benedict. So this is a conversation that's gone on, that's been repeated during the course. So I'm going to run across the maturity aspect of it. We'll give you an example of some of the advice that we provide to our customers around understanding cultural differences across the various different countries in the region. I'll give you, we had an example today with a conversation that I had with a APAC client around how drivers in Australia are expected to be treated by the company. So when we talk about cultural differences, and language and culture is one of the sort of categories that we have here when we're talking about market maturity. It's corporate culture is part of that as well. So when you're trying to manage an APAC fleet centrally, and you're dealing with your local entities in different countries, they're going to have corporate cultural change differences between them that you'll need to be able to address once you're designing a policy and implementing it. So one of the things we came across today is that the drivers in this company's drivers in Australia had a certain way they expected to be treated because of the role they had in the business, and that was different from people in the same role in other countries, right? So that created a little bit of management friction, that you can't roll the same mechanisms when you're treating the drivers in Japan. You can't treat the drivers in Australia the same way because they have different expectations. So definitely one of the challenges that you're all facing trying to manage APAC fleets, or that you would face trying to manage APAC fleets, is understanding not just the geographic cultural differences, so what the market maturity differences are, but also what your corporate cultural differences are in each entity. So again, that's just not trying to repeat the maturity conversation that's gone on several times before, but it's very clear that it touches on every aspect of what we do. Thanks, Benedict. I'm going to push through to the next one. Again, this is a slide that's been repeated a little bit. So we talk about, and in a little bit more depth earlier with Stephen's presentation, about the differences between the financing options that are present in emerging markets versus maturing markets, and how those things will come together for you. And the regulatory environment in an emerging market, that's going to be a challenge, whereas in a mature market in Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Taiwan, India, to a degree, it's very clear how the regulations, the local regulations, are going to govern the way you apply your fleet policy. Subject matter expertise in some of the mature markets is going to be more in depth, and going to be able to have more detailed conversations about how to achieve outcomes, how to achieve sustainability outcomes, financial outcomes, management outcomes, safety. Safety, sustainability, and savings. So the messaging that was sort of repeated through our 3 panel members, and I think that's something that you get in a mature market. You've got access to that in far more depth. So we'll slip through straight to the next one. I'm conscious of time for everyone, obviously. So when we're looking to apply or looking to move into a regionally managed APAC fleet, an APAC regionally managed fleet, these are some things we think you should be aiming to. You should be aiming for in terms of making your job a little bit easier. And it's no surprise, obviously, that the 2 leasing companies came on here and said you should choose leasing, and you should choose an APAC provider. I don't think that's a real shock for anyone. But understanding our philosophy with regards to APAC management is regional strategy that's informed by local expertise. So we believe you need to be dealing with a partner that can deal with not just your strategy at a regional level, but can also be informed at a local level by what the regulations and the differences in the leasing markets are. And they can roll that information up and educate you on it in a manner that is concise, and the communication is nice and clean. That's one of the things we think you should be looking for. Understanding the differences in the maturity, again, understanding the differences in the market that you're playing in, participation levels with OEMs, participation levels with fleet management providers and our competitors, understanding where we're playing in each country, and then making informed decisions about that, and then understanding what that means from your ability to deliver outcomes. How can we deliver outcomes for you on sustainability as a topic when the participation of the OEMs isn't there? So you need to move to more sustainable vehicles, but that information around carbon emissions isn't available in all countries, right? So those are the challenges that you need to understand. Again, I'm sort of repeating myself here, understanding local customs and the preferred solutions. And again, that talks about what your corporate culture is in each country, as well as what the market expectations are in each country. And then we think taking small steps locally that can align with your regional goals and with your global goals. We think that's a small thing. So that's an important thing you take. Look for low-hanging fruit. It's a phrase that we say a lot. So look for the steps that you can take easily that achieve the biggest bang for your buck, I suppose, from an outcomes point of view, and then gradually work back from there into you're dealing with the more complex issues in each country, trying to, again, all the time, trying to align all the outcomes with your regional expectations, but again, informed by what is possible, what is occurring, and what the future trends are in the local markets that you're participating in. And that's basically the snapshot of who we are. Again, I'm definitely conscious of time. So thanks very much for the opportunity to speak to you guys, and I'll hand it back to you, Yves.
Thank you so much, Cameron. And thank you also for highlighting the importance of understanding different cultures across the region. So, ladies and gentlemen of Fleet Apac, this closes our very first inaugural expert meeting. Before we close the session, I would like to inform you of the events that are coming up. On 29th of November this year, we will have the second advisory board that will be held for advisory board members only. On 24th of January of next year, we will have the next expert meeting. Expect us to talk about sustainability and technology supporting sustainability. We would also like to inform you that on November 9th of this year, we will be releasing an ebook, an important ebook, which is called Leasing Around the World, in which you will find leasing volumes for all the regions, including APAC, and as much as possible detail on local and regional volumes of leasing. And then finally, but not the least, we are extremely delighted to announce that in March, April next year, we will be holding the first APAC Fleet event, either in Singapore or Bangkok, still to be decided. And we hope to meet all of you face to face in either of these two beautiful locations. And in closing, I would again like to thank our founding partners, the LD Automotive Leaseplan. This will be, I think, the last days, weeks that we will be using the old name. Looking forward to the new one. And we would also like to thank Oryx. And finally, I would like to thank Arvind Valuvan, Monica Damus, Mukul Padwatan, Thierry Faure, and Cameron Kerr for helping us set up this first session. And obviously, we would like all of you to be present in our next sessions as well. This leaves me with thanking everyone who has dialed in for your time and for your attention. And I wish you a very pleasant day or a very pleasant evening, depending on where you are located. This was us. Thank you so much.